Hey there, Around the Layout listeners. With advanced previews of upcoming episodes and monthly giveaways, now's the time to become an operating crew member. For just $3 a month, you'll get an exclusive membership sticker, your name listed on the operating crew roster, and automatic entry into our monthly giveaway drawings. Just as important, your financial support keeps all of our episodes from behind paywalls and free of those annoying car insurance commercials you hear on other podcasts. Joining the operating crew is quick and easy. Head to patreon.com/Around the Layout podcast. And if you missed that, you'll find a link on our website, aroundthelayout.com. And thank you for being a listener. Enjoy the show. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Around the Layout, where model railroaders come to tell their story. My name is Ray Arnott. So glad you could join us. Joining me tonight from Springfield, Missouri, Mike Landis. Mike, welcome to the show.
So glad to be here, Ray. Thank you so much. Hopefully it's cooler where you are. It's kind of sweltering here in the middle of Missouri right now.
Yeah, we're getting kind of this kind of, I don't know, it's been a strange summer. We had a ton of rain, followed by some really cool and very comfortable. It's almost like September-like for a while.
Nice. Okay.
So,
well, I'm jealous.
Yeah, but then muggy today, some rain, but it's supposed to be some decent weather. What I'm really worried about is some sweltering weather, because in a couple of weeks from now, we're recording this on the 8th of August. Just a couple of weeks from the NMRA National Convention down in Texas. And
absolutely.
Not sure whose idea it was to do a national convention in August in Texas, but I'm sure I'll be sweltering down there pretty good. Although there'll be nice AC rooms and everything.
Yeah.
Stuff.
Well, I'll be sweltering with you. I won't be able to make it for the entire convention, but I'll be there for the National Train Show for a couple of days. So I may see you around, and I'll be enjoying that Texas heat right along with you. So.
Absolutely. So looking forward to that and being down in Texas for the National Convention. Look forward to meeting you in person down there.
That'll be great.
But I'm looking forward tonight to getting to know you and your model railroading journey. So let's get to it. Let me ask you, Mike, what got you started in the model railroading hobby?
Well, I feel like my story is very similar to other people's when I, listen to the podcast right here. People ask me that question a lot, and as far back as I can remember, I always loved trains, and that goes back even to being 3 years old, getting a Fisher-Price train. That was my favorite toy I had. I wore it out. My mom got me a second one. I wore that out, and so as early as I can remember, I always loved trains. They were always an obsession for me. Kind of graduating from there, my stepdad was in the Air Force. And even though I'm from Springfield, Missouri originally, and I claim this as home, we traveled quite a bit around the country, moving to different bases. And it seemed like no matter where we lived, we were always near a railroad track. Here in Springfield, it was, being in Frisco, and that was my earliest memories. From there, we moved to Cheyenne, Wyoming, and lived very close to the Union Pacific yards right there. Moved from there, ended up in Sedalia, Missouri, which is the basis of my layout. And that was an amazing place for a small rail fan child. You had the Katy Railroad that was also on the main line of the Missouri Pacific Union Pacific from Kansas City to St. Louis. So with that, you had Union Pacific trains, Amtrak, Southern Pacific trains on trackage rides, some Rio Grande stuff. It was just an amazing parade. Every train you could think of rolling through there. Going back to the modeling aspect of it, my rail fanning and modeling is very closely intertwined, as you can imagine, with most people. Got my first Tyco train set when I was about 8 years old. It was the Chattanooga Choo Choo, and that was just on a little 48 4x8 piece of plywood running in circles. Had a blast with that. That was my entire world for that point. And I really never realized you could have a layout. I had to look this article up, but it was the Smithsonian Magazine in December of 1988 had a feature article about just model railroading and layouts. And I had never seen a model railroader magazine at that point, or even a trains magazine, or had any realization that you could build an entire miniature world.
Right.
And so I got a hold of that magazine and just wore the cover off of it. It was just in shreds by the time I had looked over and over. And so at that point, I realized I wanted to build a layout someday. And we lived very close in Sedalia to the Katy main line. And I was enamored with that railroad line in particular. I don't know if it was the bright color scheme with the green and the yellow, but compared to the Mopac and Union Pacific, just the Katy just took to me. And so as a young rail fan, I was there for the final years before, obviously, Union Pacific bought out the Katy, took out the track. I didn't even realize railroads were ever abandoned until I watched that happen. That was a sad realization for a little kid, but kind of had it along my lines in the back of my head that one day I wanted to build a Katy layout featuring Sedalia, and build several smaller layouts over the years, ones that I was not proud of. They were pretty shoddy. They're not ones you take pictures of and put on the internet because you're proud of them, but just some Burlington Northern type layouts. I had one for Santa Fe, just freelance type things, just kind of honing my skills, trying to figure out what I wanted and where to go from there. You know how life goes. You kind of take breaks from the hobby, you get back into it. And I always kept a pretty consistent rail fanning interest, but just getting busy with work, and I travel a lot for work, and I've moved a lot as an adult for work. It was during the pandemic that I realized I had to revive that hobby to stay sane, in a sense. I mean, the world was kind of crazy at that point. I was working from home. I needed an outlet. Lo and behold, I had all my model trains just waiting to be brought back out, and that's sort of what led me to jumping right back in full force to it, and I've loved every minute of it. And I feel like this time around, the seriousness, being able to connect with so many people has been great. And it's I can't imagine taking a break ever again at this point, but you never know. Hopefully not, right?
That's right. Yeah, it's funny how we talk about with as many folks as we've interviewed, and the repetitive story of the childhood to and then all the you get to that high school, college years, and then you're young adult and the family stuff or whatever the case may be, where it kind of goes, but that the embers still always seem to stay lit. It's not many people that move away from the hobby all too much.
Yeah.
I want to go back a little bit here.
Yeah.
When you moved in, and your memories of Sedalia Branch when you were a kid, because I know a lot of that relates to the layout that you're doing now. And
correct.
In one of your videos, you were mentioning a building that you couldn't remember as a kid. But I want to ask about what you do remember in a little more detail. What year did you actually end up moving to there? I mean, like, what age were you when that happened?
I was 8 years old, so that would have been in 87. And so I was there for the final 2 years of the Katy as an independent railroad. And then Union Pacific operated it after the merger, but it was still fully Katy for all visual reasons, all Katy locomotives. And then before they stopped the operation of that St. Louis line and abandoned it. So it was about 4 years there. So it was a very, as a little kid, I remember you'd hear the train coming through. Wasn't a busy main line, but you'd hear the horns. I'd run out on the street, and I could look right down to the crossing, and my mom remembers yelling at me to get out of the street, or I was going to get in trouble. But hey, that was the highlight of my day, watching the Katy trains roll through.
That's great. Did you understand any bit of it? Did you pick up any, kind of, what they were doing? And when all these changes happened, UP buys them. Were you aware of this, or did it just kind of like all seem like all kind of like in a straight line to you?
Honestly, at the time of the merger, I didn't really know a lot what was going on. When I would see the Katy trains go past, you'd have the green locomotives. Sometimes there would be Union Pacific or Mopac engines as a little kid. You would see those. And I do recall seeing fewer and fewer of the green locomotives and more of the yellow Union Pacific. And then, of course, even some of the Mopac blue still mixed in there. But I wasn't really sure what was going on. You just see a hodgepodge of locomotives. And if you've ever seen pictures of the Katy from the late 80s, they had their green locomotives, but they had a lot of secondhand units, the Conrail units, the Illinois Central Gulf units. It was a very colorful rainbow.
Yeah.
And so I was used to seeing just all kinds of stuff rolling through in those consists, and I didn't really know fully what was going on. At the time of the abandonment of the railroad, there was a lot of talk of converting it to a state park, and it was in newspaper articles that I read that I found out what was happening to the railroad, why the trains had stopped running. And at that point, it was the trains were done with, but I was able to kind of have that basis of knowledge there.
Yeah. So as far as, your prototype is kind of going away and you start with a Tyco set. It's funny because it's the same set I started with, the Chattanooga Choo Choo set.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's pretty popular amongst our age. We're about a year apart. So yeah, it's funny. But then, so you have this set, but then you start, what leads you to your next set, and where do you start to go in more detail from, like, the Chattanooga, which maybe you had set up, like you said, kind of goes around, and what's your next step in the model railroading journey even as a kid?
Well, being a little kid, you didn't really have access to hobby shops. There was not a hobby shop in Sedalia. There was no internet where I could hop on and go into retailers and things like that. So there were some hobby stores in Springfield. And so whenever I would come back to Springfield, it was Trainland Hobbies was the main store here. So I'd come back to visit Grandma and Grandpa, and they'd bring me down to the train store, and I would start buying pieces here and there. Now, granted, it was still Tyco cars, Tyco editions. I hadn't even gotten into Atherton Blue Box, as basic as that was at that point, but just buying little pieces here and there, adding to my train, going from there. I just, year by year, as I got older and got into the hobby more, just kind of graduated eventually to Atherton Blue Box, for instance. And that seems like a lifetime ago, and I guess it was, honestly.
Yeah. Tony Cook would defriend me if I didn't ask you. Do you still have all your old Tyco stuff?
I do not have any of my Tyco stuff. I have all of my original, when I was kind of getting into Atherton, a lot of that stuff when I was about 10, 12 years old. But Tyco stuff, I can sit and name every car that I had on the train, the red caboose on the end, but I don't have any of the original trains, unfortunately.
Oh, bummer. But you start with the Atherton Blue Box, you're starting to build up and stuff. You mentioned, you see this Smithsonian article that you're pulling apart. Do you start to build stuff after, when, as you're looking at this Smithsonian article and start to get new ideas and start to kind of apply them at a bit there?
I did. And obviously what I had was very primitive being a little kid, and I, just starting to get scenery products. It was more than, hey, I can go beyond just having a bare piece of plywood, and I cannot recall the layouts that were in that. On the cover of that magazine was a Lionel F unit, but the layouts were just, it opened up a whole new world to me. And I think I went down to the public library in Sedalia. They had some layout books there. And so just getting ideas on, adding turnouts and additional tracks and sidings, and it's just little by little, you're evolving in your mind with a hobby as you're getting older and just being exposed to more stuff. There was even a model railroad club there in Sedalia for a short amount of time when I was a kid, and we were building a layout in an upper story of a building on the main street. And can't remember the guys' names, but I appreciate them taking me under their wing and bringing me to the train club meetings, and I was able to get a lot of experience through that. One of the guys had a Katy Railroad, an N-scale Katy Railroad layout in his basement, and that was the first realization that not only can I build a layout, it can be a Katy layout even. Right, so,
right. About what age was that when you saw that N-scale layout?
I probably would have been about 12 at that point. Okay. Yeah.
So that's got to be super cool. All your kid memories of seeing the Katy in your hometown, and now somebody's modeled it. And I can recall the first time I saw like HO scale stuff of locomotives I was seeing in my neighborhood. It was like,
exactly.
Whoa, what's this thing? This is super cool. Right. So it must have been really inspiring to you. I mean, even though it took you a while to get there, still must have been something that really planted a seed.
Absolutely. And it was kind of interesting because at the time, having a Katy layout or modeling what had been come to become my favorite railroad still seemed very far out of reach, because at the time nobody was offering, that I recall or that I'd ever seen, locomotives painted in the Katy, the green and the yellow scheme. I remember seeing some box cars, some cabooses, but this guy had hand painted, as far as I know, and decaled all these Katy locomotives. And so being a little kid, man, that just seemed so daunting. How would I ever learn how to do that? I eventually got into some painting and decaling myself, but thankfully the modeling gods have been great to Katy modelers in the last handful of years. There's been so much great stuff come out. So we talked about this. The hobby kind of goes dormant after a little while. Imagine the teenage years, like everybody else. And then you said it was really pandemic. So that was quite a while that you kind of stayed, away from the model railroading hobby.
What kind of kept it lit between, say, that, those teenage years and then, pandemic of the 2020, really, the pandemic era? What kind of kept those embers burning? Was there rail fanning? Was there anything that you kind of kept a little bit of a touch on?
Yeah, I certainly did continue my rail fanning. I still enjoyed researching, just reading about railroad history, digging into obviously the Katy Railroad, but whatever historical railroads I can find. So that was great. I always, had a camera in hand that I would, wherever I had moved to, wherever I was living for work, I got to see a lot of railroads doing that. I always, during that time frame, it seems like I had a module of sorts. In a spare bedroom, I would always have something that maybe like, 5 feet of track that I could run a locomotive back and forth, maybe a building or two, very basic, but just enough to have my trains out there. I may get an itch once every couple weeks to go out there and fiddle around with it for an hour or two. But, you graduate college, my two boys who are now 20 and 21, but, I had little kids, little babies, and just life gets busy, and we've heard that story over and over from people about what happens there.
Where did some of your work travels take you? Like some of the memorable spots, especially for rail fanning? Like what was some of the better spots that you ended up in your career?
Well, my favorite's route in California. Being a young kid here and finally getting copies of Trains magazine, finding out about the big rail fan spots out west. And so I had moved to California for a handful of years. I lived in San Diego for a while, then in Fresno. But I got to see these amazing hot spots, Cajon Pass, Tehachapi Loop, all the railroads in Los Angeles, and stuff that I had just read about my entire life in these magazines, and they just seemed like they were in some faraway fantasy railroad world, And I remember sitting at the side of Tehachapi Loop for the first time and seeing a consist of, it would have been BNSF at the time, the early days of BNSF, but a consist, going through the loops and thinking, I'm actually standing here. This is not a video or a book that I've seen for two previous decades. That was pretty great. Cajon Pass, I spent a lot of time out there. I was not any sort of a professional photographer. You see all these great photographs in the publications and books, people going out there, and it was nothing like that. It was just out there, tromping along these old paths and just watching trains, just getting to experience different railroads other than, UP or BN was what we pretty much had back here at home. So.
Yeah, seeing railroading on a big scale. I know I've come from, small railroading, regional railroading here in Eastern Connecticut. That's what I've seen my whole life. And the first time of seeing like massive class 1 stuff and, big trains, it's like that whole, holy mackerel, it's just exactly really, really awe-inspiring.
It really was.
So you land in Springfield, Missouri, and then, as you mentioned, the pandemic hits where, you're looking for something to do. Why was it model railroading? What was the real spark of that?
Well, it was a couple things that happened. In the years prior, I believe it was in 2017, 2018, unfortunately, because of the pandemic, those years in there kind of seem like mush, but I continued the rail fanning quite a bit and the historical research. And so I actually wrote and published a book on the Katy Railroad. Called Show Me Katy, and it was focusing on the Missouri lines of the Katy. Lots of great Katy books out there, but the authors always focused on the busier parts of the line, Kansas City, down into Oklahoma, down to Texas, for obvious reasons. And the line to St. Louis, being a secondary route, was just literally put on the back burner for the most part. You might find a handful of pictures. And so I published that book, just, being my favorite railroad, wanting a project to do. And I had been collecting just details and information and photographs for several years. And so I finally got that book compiled, and I believe it was in 2017 that we finally got that out there and sold out of that book. It was an amazing project. I loved it. One of my favorite parts was getting to travel for presentations about the book and meeting railroaders and things like that. And so whenever the pandemic happened and I got back into the modeling, it seemed like an obvious choice because I had literally spent years researching this line. And that was, just something that I thought, I can't recreate this railroad in real life, but I really had grown to love it even more through those years of, traveling to every town, documenting stories, visiting railroaders, looking at the remnants of the railroad. A large portion of it's a hiking and biking trail now. There are some portions that are still under operation as a short line, but it just kind of continued that fascination beyond that. And so it kind of moved from the pages of the book into HO scale.
I was first believed that you were talking about doing research and stuff kind of as a hobby, but this was not just a hobby. I mean, you're doing some serious stuff to write a book. When did you really know that you had a book in you for this? I mean, where does that idea get inspired to say, not only am I going to research it and I really love this, but I'm going to write this down and publish it? Where does that happen?
Obviously, being a radio, TV broadcaster, I write for a living, and so I'm used to just writing news articles every day. It finally dawned on me, I would say, as we were getting close to the 30th anniversary of the Katy Railroad being folded into the MOPAC, Union Pacific fold right there. And once again, just an interest in trying to find information and photographs about this. And finding out there wasn't a whole lot, but the more I dug, the more I found out there was some stuff, and there was an interest out there for a book. And so that 30th anniversary, that the 2018, kind of gave me a goal of that's a date to commemorate, to get this book completed and done. And so I kind of worked on it. And some people ask me if I'm going to do another book. I would like to. Looking back on it, I don't know how I did it. It was a lot of work. It was a lot of work. And now knowing how much work went into that, I know some guys just kind of crank them out. And I've started to work on another Katy book and some other projects as well, but kind of taking more of my time. I don't have a deadline of that 30-year mark to get me to motivate me at this point, but still doing a little bit of that for sure. Yeah,
that's amazing, to be able to, kind of investigative journalist kind of thing going on where you're digging into in a historian, all those aspects that are just really fun to go back. I mean, you have a little bit of roots in it in your childhood of seeing this stuff, but now to really dig in and understand and know what you were seeing as a kid, as an adult, and not only that, but write about it and share all that information with this railroaded community is really a cool thing.
It was a lot of fun reliving parts of my childhood as well, because these were things that I was, seeing, watching these Katy trains going by every day, seeing some of the operations and some of the industries. But when you're a little kid, you don't have a camera. At that point, most folks did not have a camera in their pocket like we do now.
Yeah, well, yeah.
And so it was just things that I saw, and they were part of my memory. And as time was going on, things you kind of forgot about or the memories faded. But when you start a book project and the slides start rolling in from across the country, even the world, you see these things that you hadn't seen visually in decades. And you're like, I remember that. I have fond memories of seeing that, particular building or whatnot. So it was a trip down memory lane, I guess, self-serving in that little aspect of it as well.
Well, yeah, sure. I mean, it's just amazing. And I think you hit on yet another point I try to make in the podcast, because I have a little interest in doing some photography as well. And I always feel like, in 2023, and I've started, maybe 2005, 6, 7 is when I started really rail fanning. And as I'm taking these photos, it's like, man, I really missed the golden, the golden era of railroading. But what you find out is the photo you took in 2005 was, kind of a golden era to somebody in 2023. It's always like trying to capture. So it's history to somebody, and it's meaningful to somebody, especially, our age is, the 80s, but somebody will say 60s or 50s, but the 80s and the 90s, and they're all behind us now. And, so has railroading changed dramatically in those times too. So what you're able to capture and what you're able to document in a book is really great, because now, that's history captured.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of interesting that you mentioned that. And that's one thing that you learn as a rail fan as time goes on. Because I remember being a kid, and at that point, the golden age would have been the steam era.
Yeah.
And steam trains were cool, but I had no connection to those. They were trains. I liked them. But the only steam locomotive I saw as a child was one year the 8444 came through Sedalia on its way. I think it was to an event in St. Louis. Might have been, I'm guessing 88, 89. You may know, but some of the listeners may remember. But it came through Sedalia and made a stop. And that was the first time I ever saw a steam locomotive And the only time I saw a steam locomotive probably till I was 30 years old again,
Yeah.
So I had no connection to that. But now it's funny, what I have is the great memories of the 80s, as you mentioned. I run into younger folks at the train shows, and to them, an Amtrak, P-42 carrying a bunch of superliners, that's amazing, and that's what they remember.
Yeah.
And so it is kind of funny how it morphs from generation to generation.
Absolutely, yeah. What we remember is old to them. What's old to or what's old to us or new to us is old to the past generation. It's just
exactly,
yeah. It's amazing, but awesome that you a book about the Katy, and now you have all this information, obviously on paper, and a lot of it in your head, and you've got all this. So yeah, now you're talking about after you write this book, now you're going to apply it into a model railroad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's one of those things where I had the documentation through the book. When I wrote the book, I had no intentions of building the layout. Maybe it was going to be a freelance layout of the Katy or something, but I was like, why not do my best to create this? And what I kind of tell folks is it's a little more detailed than proto-freelance. I'm a very detail-oriented person, and if things don't look exactly like they do in real life, I would get frustrated. And so I realized I couldn't take an exact approach. And I realized that when I'm measuring something, for instance, a grain elevator, I do measurements of a grain elevator to take it. And if I don't get it exactly spot on, I would get frustrated. But then I would realize, what? Probably nobody on this planet knows that the eave on that grain elevator is 34 feet wide. Nobody does. Absolutely nobody. Maybe one other person in the world. And so if it's 1 foot off, as I'm doing it, do my best and create something that's going to, inspire somebody to realize, hey, that's what that structure is right there.
Yeah.
But just to have fun with it. I had to learn some around the edges how to have fun with it, because you can get really caught up. I wouldn't have called myself a nitpicker or a rivet counter, but there may be some signs in there that could have developed into that bad habit, I guess.
Well, I think that, with you doing so much research and knowing so much about it now with that process, it must be hard for you to kind of let go of some of those details too, because like you said, being so detail orientated that, where can you personally draw the line, right? And say, I'm okay with this. I'm okay knowing that isn't exact, but it's okay. And sometimes I know at least for me, that can be a battle. That's like an internal struggle of sorts of trying to figure out what can I let go and what do I have to have exact.
Right, exactly. And I've used this term loosely before. I have a good enough approach, and I don't mean that in the sense of I'm being shoddy or not putting my most into it, but good enough meaning everybody who sees that is going to know exactly what that structure is, no doubt about it. There are structures, things I've built on the layout, and I know some things that are not exact about them, and I sit there and think, wow, it catches my eye. Yeah. But then I'll post a picture of it, and people that remember that building go, that's spot on, that's exactly. And I'm like, well, if you want to believe that, that's fine. but it's good enough. It's close enough. It's so close that there's no doubt about what I'm trying to recreate in that model.
Yeah, it's a fair representation. Yeah,
exactly.
And that's what you're looking to create. So
yeah.
All right, so 2020, we're going to build, and obviously, I tell you, after all this research, it's got to be the Sedalia line, right?
There's no other choice. That had to be it.
Yeah. You've got way too much information, way too much history with this. It's in your heart, and it's something you have to do. So, talk about where you're going to build this and kind of how the plan develops to put this layout together.
Where I was currently, or where I was at the time, was just I had a house that I had moved out of Springfield for another job, had moved back. And at that point, I realized, before I get my career fully established back here at home, not knowing where I was going to go, I'm just going to keep it as a modular type thing. So I constructed down one side of my garage, just a small yard in Sedalia, the Art Deco overpass over Highway 50. And once again, so many times I had just a simple module and a spare bedroom or a garage for so many years. And it was going to be just something like that. At that point, a lot of manufacturers had come out with more Katy rolling stock and locomotives. And I figured this is going to be a great spot for me to simply, just run some trains back and forth like I've always done. Maybe one day I'll have a big enough house. So things progressed. I ended up moving again. I decided, I'm staying in Springfield at this point. I'm probably not going to move anywhere else. And so I signed on with my current TV station. They kind of own me through a contract for quite a while. I'm not going anywhere. Yep. Yeah, exactly. And so I will kind of tell you about that. I moved into a larger house, had more space. It's not a perfect space. It's in a pretty big 2-car garage. Basement would have been nicer. I'm still working toward that. But I had enough space to expand my representation of Sedalia, and then also kind of go a little bit farther than that. And so things have been progressing. I have quite a bit of Sedalia completed. It's not 100% complete, but I have, the trackage down, working on a lot of the details. I will eventually model Sedalia in about 30 miles back south to Clinton, Missouri. That was the portion of the line that I had the greatest knowledge of because it was close to home. There are some other guys out there that model the Katy St. Louis line, but they model the more scenic portion from Sedalia towards St. Louis along the Missouri River. It had bluffs and huge hills and hung onto the side of the Missouri River, had a tunnel, the massive bridge over the Missouri River. That seems like the obvious portion you'd want to model, and there are a lot of guys that have great layouts out there that have recreated that. But my portion was the half of the Sedalia sub that was pretty plain. It was the plains of West Central Missouri, grain elevators and small towns, and what you think of more along the lines of Western Missouri or Kansas. Not quite as elaborate scenery-wise, but I love Midwestern railroads. I love feed mills and grain elevators. I love covered hopper cars, have way too many of those. And so modeling that Western portion gives me the ability to recreate what I remembered of that portion of the line, and then also expand upon my other interest of those types of industries on that side of the state.
Yeah, so you're going for the Katy that you can relate to, not what everybody else, but what it meant to you.
Exactly. Yeah. And so between the other guys out there that have modeled the eastern portion, the western portion, for such a lightly trafficked, obscure line, I think we've kind of got it covered, or at least getting toward that at some point, I think. So.
Oh, that's excellent. So when you start to plan this, what area it comes to mind on the Sedalia line that it was like the most, you were most excited to model?
I would say and you'll see photographs of this, the thing that I remember the most about the Katy line, other than it being near my house, was the Art Deco overpass over US Highway 50. When I was a kid, it was just so exciting to go underneath that really cool bridge and see the trains going overhead. Yeah. And that was actually the first structure I built before I even began building the layout.
Wow.
It was winter time. I wasn't going out in my garage at that time. It was pretty cold.
Right.
And so I built that overpass, and then kind of the layout grew around that. And so right around that area was the small yard, the massive Sedalia Katy Depot, which I will get to when my skills reach that point. It was a very huge structure. Yeah. Some of the older industries. On the south side of Sedalia was an industrial park, and that's where most of the rail-served customers were in the 80s. So there were two parts right there, on the north side, the south side, and that's what I'm representing right now. And what I have completed so far was those two ends in town, about a 2.5-mile stretch, to give me plenty of industries to switch out and represent that before I continue building onto the layout from that point.
I want to highlight a thing that you just said here about you're going to put off the depot until your skills develop. That's kind of an interesting point, that you're that you're in that learning process, and that you're learning how to model, and, picking projects that you can basically hone your skills on. What would you say up to now has been your most challenging project?
This is going to seem kind of strange, but I would say weathering. I have a lot of guys that watch videos and say, hey, are you going to weather that engine? You're going to weather those cars? I look at my cars and I know they need weathering. And that's one thing that kind of bothers me. But over the years, I've tried honing that skill, but I can never get it to look exactly like I want. I can work on a locomotive or a car. I can get close to it. It was one thing, maybe 20, 30 years ago when a blue box kit was $10, but when you're buying those tangent hoppers that are $55, they're lovely, but there's less room for a mess up on there. You can't throw away a $55 car, for instance. So I do, spray the shine off my cars with dull coat. I do, chalk them up a little bit, but that's one thing that I've had a challenge with. I do it. I, once again, get enough of it done. I've got a lot of cars to go, but that's one thing that's in the process. Track work is fine. A lot of guys despise ballasting. I love ballasting. So I've never really had too much of a problem with track work right there. My control system is pretty basic with DCC. I use an NCE power cab. For the size of layout, that's more than plenty.
Perfect, yeah, for sure.
But I see a lot of guys when I visit their layouts that have these massive DCC systems with miles and miles of cable and Wi-Fi route. I'm just like, that's great. Yeah. If I'm staying with a railroad I model with 2 trains, maybe 3 trains per day, thankfully I'm not going to need to have that. It might be kind of fun to learn at some point, but it gives me a headache to even think about that far down the line. So
yeah, for sure. And you talked about weathering, and on the show we've had Weather My Trains as a sponsor, and I recorded a commercial. And if anybody heard it, I said, if anybody's like me, and that wasn't just a commercial. That's me telling you, I'm scared to model my stuff. It's like I've paid a decent amount for my rolling stock and my locomotives, and it paralyzes me in fear, like thinking about, okay, well, if I don't get this right, how am I going to get all this stuff back off? And, it's definitely something that you've got to work yourself up to and get some good practice in.
Yeah, exactly. I've had some folks help me out over the years. Sammy Carlisle, I've never met him personally, but I know him online and we communicate there. He's done some weathering stuff for me. It looks amazing. Yep. But I've got a lot to go. Athearn came out with their GP38s, 3-2s recently. Got a lot of those. Walthers is releasing their new SW1200 right now. So awesome. People are just really cranking out the Katy stuff. I don't know why. 30 some odd years later, we're getting our day, but it's finally arrived. It's been great. So yeah.
Well, get your wallet ready because here they come, and it's hard to turn them down when you start to see your favorite railroad being produced.
I have been spending my train budget, maybe plus some, every single month for a while now. So
that's excellent. So you're out in the garage. You're starting to put this. Did you draw out a track plan, or did you kind of have one in your head? How did that whole process go?
My track plan was the official Katy Railroad master track map from the 1980s. I already pretty much had an idea, enough of a memory to remember what the railroad looked like with their track plan. Yeah. So right now it's a condensed version, but I'm doing my best to create every turnout where there was one, every siding, every industrial spur. Once again, things are condensed quite a bit, as any layout has that issue. That's what I'm going by right now. And so right now, what you see on Sedalia, on my layout, is the exact track plan as it looked in the official Katy map from, I think 1985 is what the edition I have.
In compression, were there any like painful cuts, or like something that you just couldn't quite include, or was there any of those kind of like real difficult decisions on things that you had to say, I can't quite do it like that, and had to make a change?
There were several spots, and obviously, I'm modeling so far on this section of the layout about a 2.5-3 mile top section through Sedalia, and I have layout space wise right now currently built 20 feet by 10 feet by 20 feet. That's a lot of compression I had to do. One area that was a little difficult, and I wish I could have done differently, was having to compress the yard. The yard in Sedalia was already very small, and I had to, in my model, make it even smaller. Right. And so it'd be nice right now to have more space to, have more car storage. It does just fine when I'm doing my switching and needing to run around things. When I get the full layout built out, I'm going to have either St. Louis or Parsons, Kansas represented, and that'll be plenty of yard space when I get there. But for right now, I would say 90% of my layout includes boxes of all my cars underneath until I can, bring out a couple dozen per time and mix them up, which kind of keeps it fresh, Yeah. Yep. But I wish I had more yard space. That's for sure.
I think we all do. I was just having this conversation and with another modeler about yards and trying to figure out yards, and how do you plan one out, and, car counts in yards and making sure you have enough room. And I know personally for me, it's like my yard's like 98%. Like maybe you could fit one or two more cars into that yard and that's it, which is great because it makes a challenging operating area, but it doesn't give you room for expansion. And when you find another car, or like maybe you recall another car in the history, or you're trying to add something, it makes it difficult when you have a yard that's condensed. And
exactly. Yeah. So I'll have more yard space at some point. I wished I could have included the Mopac and Katy Junction, where the two interchange there in Sedalia. My layout track plan just kind of goes around the curve where it's going to hit the junction and kind of dead ends at the wall.
Yeah.
So I know the Mopac junction's around there. That would provide even more, interchange and yard storage space. But, that'll be a project incoming. That'll be pretty easy to get up and going as a next step for sure.
Do you have any future plans for operations? I mean, I know that you talked about with the power cab that it's, works great, and it does for you. And do you plan on having an ability to share this layout with others and have them operate it as well?
Absolutely. And I've had a lot of people asking me that. And so I've already got a list mentally going on. And I've got a lot of friends that I know that would like to come see it. But sure. I've even had people, email me, hey, I'm driving from, St. Louis to Dallas. Can I stop and see your layout and whatnot? And sadly enough, right now, my work schedule, working in the evenings, the opposite of when most people would be around. But I do plan on having operating sessions. The St. Louis sub, in reality, had a local every day. It had one train from Dallas to St. Louis, one from St. Louis to Dallas, and then a lot of weeks it had a unit coal train. So on a really good day on that line, you would have seen 4 trains, but most of the time, 2. Wasn't Cajon Pass or Tehachapi, that's for sure. So.
No, it's such fun railroading, and it's such fun railroading to model when you have a line like that with switching opportunities, with maybe some traffic moving back and forth, and have them kind of the best of both worlds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's kind of interesting, building out these industries. And I was thinking about this a few weeks ago. I get so caught up in researching that you kind of, I wouldn't say you disconnect from the emotional aspect of the hobby, but sometimes it's just you get in the task mode of it. And I got to thinking about it's really sad that, in my lifetime, in the late 80s, there were so many industries served by this railroad. None of them exist anymore. I mean, the railroad is long gone. The industries are long gone. It doesn't take long for something to change very, very rapidly. And I learned some of that even with the writing and producing of my book. I visited every single town along the way. Some pictures look the same as they did in 1987. Some look completely different, but I mean, time marches on, as they say.
Yeah, and it sure does. And again, going back to that point, if you're out there and you're clicking the shutter, you're capturing history, and eventually somebody is going to be interested in that history and remember it like you did. And it's just so important to not be discouraged and think that the best days are behind you. That you're capturing the people, the golden era of tomorrow, kind of thing. So definitely important to remember that.
Yeah. Well, and even from a rail fan perspective, it's easy to get caught up in, well, the good old days were way back when. And when I'm sitting trackside, it's just BNSF or UP. They everywhere you look, it looks like it's a sea of orange, But to a lot of guys, that's amazing. And it's in the future, they're going to look back on this as what they recall. And so I try to enjoy today's railroads as much as possible, not get caught up too much in the past, although that's what the focus is sometimes. Yeah.
It was only a couple of years ago I took pictures of, up in Maine of the central Maine in Quebec, which is gone.
Yes.
And then you take pictures of, just a few years ago, Kansas City Southern and CP will never be the same. They'll eventually get repainted, and, the railroads that are going over to G&W paint schemes, and, it's all changing. And, if you're able to capture it now, it'll definitely be, a good piece of history again tomorrow. So,
I did learn that with the KCS, obviously, a couple of years back, knowing that all the merger talk, of course, it went CP, CN back and forth a little bit, but I knew it was going to be gone. So I went over about an hour away and got plenty of KCS trains, and I got that footage to use for something someday. So,
there you go. Yeah. Good to put it in good holding so that you'll have it for someday when somebody's going to be asking about, what's KCS look like? What was that railroad again?
Can pull that out.
That's right. So now I want to ask you, you've got this layout that you're building in your garage. When is it that you decide, you know what, I'm gonna start making some YouTube videos and share it on my YouTube channel? When do you get that? I mean, obviously you're a broadcaster and you've got that part of you, and being able to share it out in a unique way and in the YouTube videos. How does that all start for you?
I would say it was kind of by accident. I've been creating videos on YouTube for several years. They were mostly when I would go on an excursion somewhere or a tourist train, or I would visit some new location and just do rail fanning videos. They'd be mini documentaries, just me, putting together and producing, this rail fan hotspot or this community or this railroad. So I'd been doing that for a few years. And, putting out the content, I would take breaks and people would be like, well, where's, we like your content, we like your videos, where's it at? But it had to be when I would go on a trip somewhere, right. When I had time to travel. And sometimes, with work or life, you get caught up. And so if you don't go on a rail fanning trip, you don't have any new rail fanning videos. And it was by accident. One day I decided, hey, I've got a railroad in my garage. Right. There was a lot of people putting out model railroading videos, and I was like, well, let's just do a little layout tour, do a little review with some hopper cars and see where that goes. And the response I got from that was far greater than my rail fanning videos. So I'm not sure if it was that my rail fanning videos were just that bad or people were just really like the modeling topic. But
I think the latter. Because both of them are great. But your rail fanning video, your model railroad videos are fantastic.
Well, I appreciate that. And so I stumbled across it and I just kind of kept on that path. And so that was, a while back, and we just kind of shifted focus to model railroading. Every once in a while, I'll still put out a railroading video. I went to the Great Smoky Mountains Railroad in North Carolina a few weeks ago, put out one about that. But I would say 98% of it is model railroading, and it's great to see the response. I've got more response than I could have ever imagined. I appreciate everybody's support, watching the channel, subscribing, and you put this stuff out, and sometimes you're making the videos, and you're just like, is anybody going to watch this? And I'm a broadcaster for a living, but why do you want to watch me? Am I really that interesting? And somebody thinks you are, so that's always a compliment for sure.
Absolutely. So the YouTube channel is called The Main Track. You've got over 8,300 subscribers, 114 videos on your channel at this point. I'll tell you what I like, and I was turned on to your channel by our executive producer here, Paul Kassar, from Sydney, Australia, who models the Riverbelt line. So he's got some MKT in there.
He does. I've seen.
So anyway, he tells me about this, and I'm sure maybe that's why. And I'm checking it out, and I like it because your videos are quick hitters. They're on the average 6 to 10 minutes. Perfect kind of timing. It's not overly drawn out, but you get right to the point. Tell me, what were some of the favorite videos that you've done on the channel?
I really like my layout video updates, just simply where I show people, hey, I've got this completed over the past month. And I try to do those about once a month. And sometimes it's just like been a nice documentary for me, because you do all these little tiny projects and they really add up. And sometimes you forget how far you've come. And so it's kind of a point of pride to be able to look back and say, okay, I got this done in the past month. Look at the footage of the layout from 3 months ago. Wow, that looks a lot different. And kind of sharing that with folks. So people get a big kick out of that. Those are some of my more popular videos, just people just taking a look at your layout as if they were a guest walking in and taking a look at the layout and just kind of showing them around. And I kind of like that. They're just off the cuff and just kind of casual, just kind of highlighting some stuff.
Yeah, and one thing I also enjoyed about it is that you're sharing the process, which is really cool. I mean, we've seen many of railroads that are completed, and I'll pitch the argument that you learn more from an incomplete layout than you do a completed layout, because you get to see the process and you get to understand that Rome wasn't built overnight, neither is a layout, and that kind of thing where you got to go through it. For somebody that's watching your videos, what else do you hope that they get to take away from watching the Main Track on YouTube?
Just the inspiration that anybody can do this. There were so many things in this hobby that I wanted to do that I could have done, and a lot of it was just a time issue. A lot of it was a confidence issue, because I would see these the Great Model Railroads magazine come out, and you'd see stuff and you would be amazed by that, but you're like, I could never do that. And my layout right now doesn't look like that, but you just got to get up off the couch. You just got to start somewhere. And, people are looking at my layout and saying, hey, that's great. And that gives me confidence to realize that, I got up finally. I made the time for it, even if it's only 5 minutes one night or maybe 3 hours on this day. Just get busy on it, and that's what I had to do.
That's a great message. As far as the hobby, because like I talk about with the podcast is like a hobby within a hobby, and I'm sure you see that as well with the YouTube channel. And sometimes I joke that the layout suffers for the podcast. With you actually incorporating, I'm up here in my office, I'm talking to folks from all over the place, so my layout's very, without, not in reach. But with you, you're doing videos about it. Do you find that it kind of motivates you to keep going, to keep not only the layout going, but keep the YouTube channel full of video as well?
Absolutely. I would completely agree with that statement because I've got the motivation. I've got people, sometimes they're nice. Hey, I've not seen a video in a week or two. What are you working on, Mike? What are you going to show us? And so that's just kind of a nice to, I need to get out there and make a video. And I at first was trying to crank them out once a week, twice a week. I don't know why I thought I could crank them out. Some guys do that often, but I kind of burned out, not to this point of stopping, but I realized pretty quickly on that I've got to find a schedule that works best for me. And, thankfully my viewers are not sitting there waiting for a schedule for my video to drop at a certain time, certain day. They know I'm going to get them out there, and I'll put my best into them. And when I get it released, it's going to be the best I can do. So,
as you know, schedules create pressure. I know I've got to get one out every Tuesday, so it's it's trying to keep that schedule and meet it, and it's good.
Yeah, and I was going to say I have the additional thing of I'm a broadcaster, I'm a news anchor, and so I'm at work all day long making videos and talking. And so there are a lot of times when I get home that I don't feel like making more videos or talking more. I just want to be quiet, but it's a curse and a blessing having that as a career. I've got the technical ability, and sometimes I'm just like, well, I'm getting off of work. I'm already in the mode. I'll just do it right now, get it out of the way. But that's been a double-edged sword, I think.
It kind of goes along with the question I've asked of, those that are prototype railroaders. And then they go home and they model railroad. It's like, and now you're doing the same thing, but on the other side, you're a professional broadcaster that's going home and, making videos for a YouTube channel. So you're kind of bringing your work home with you. But when it's within your hobby, I'm sure it's a lot of fun too.
Yeah. Those guys must really love trains. I love trains, but I'm not sure if I could work on a train all day long, but they do. I get it. I understand. So.
Yeah. I can't see doing my full-time job as a hobby. So it's kind of fun that, to see other people that enjoy it to a point where they want to recreate it at home as well. But
absolutely,
that's a deep kind of love, that's for sure.
Yeah,
and a deep kind of love for you too. I mean, like you said, to stay motivated enough when you're working all day long in front of the camera to get back in front of the camera and then do all the editing is not easy. If anybody's ever tried it, it's it's a long process. It's not just record and put out. There's a lot of back work to it. So. That must be a challenge in itself to balance personal life, the work life, and then the layout life, and then also be able to put these YouTube videos together.
Yeah, we make it work. It's working. It's chugging along. No pun intended. So
that's great. That's great. Yeah. So let me ask, as we're getting close to wrapping up here on Around the Layout, so what's your next major addition for the Sedalia Subdivision?
So the next section I'm working on, I have enough of Sedalia completed. So now I am working out toward an overpass over Highway 65 out toward Green Ridge, the next town up. It's about, I'd say about 12 miles from Sedalia. Another grain elevator there, another couple of industries right there. And so that's the next segment that I'm building. And I've kind of talked about in the layout that I'm getting toward that. Interestingly, I have the elevator for Green Ridge done already before that part of the layout's already done. Kind of a theme I have, building structures before I have a place on the layout for it, or that section of the layout's even done. But I've got that done. So it's kind of nice to have that done to realize, hey, that's going to be sitting right there. It's going to look well. So
yeah, it's nice to have that done. And Do you find yourself maybe in modes where it's like, hey, I'm in a like a building mode, like I'm going to do buildings right now, or track laying, and can kind of go back and forth? Do you find yourself doing that?
I do, and it's nice to kind of get in, I guess, assembly line mode. I will get a lot of stuff done at once. If I'm in a track laying mode, for instance, or ballasting, I will go with that for a week or two, or however large the job is. Right now, I'm redecaling some cars, doing some patch outs and some new reporting marks on some cars, and I've been doing that for 2 or 3 days.
Yeah.
You just got to cycle it around, but I do like one track mind, just going forward until you get something done. So
yeah, it's like kind of getting on kicks of things, and then you get on a roll, and then hey, I'm knocking this out, and especially when you're starting to have some success with it, it definitely helps.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, just rolling along, doing the best. So yeah,
awesome. Well, Mike, I appreciate you coming on Around the Layout and sharing your story with us.
Well, thank you so much. As I mentioned, it was an honor to be on the show. I look at the layouts of so many guys that you've done episodes with, and once again, I'm like, man, I'm nowhere near that level yet, but it's an honor to have you look at my stuff and think that, hey, I'm good enough to be on your show. That makes me feel proud. So I appreciate that honor. So
we love sharing stories from around, and you certainly have a very interesting one, and the travels that you've made. And, now that you're sharing it out on the YouTube channel, again, everybody check that out. We'll share links here on the show notes, and we'll get that link to you so guys can go check out the main track, subscribe to that, and check out his videos. Amazing stuff. And then we'll also share some photos of his layout up on the Facebook page as well. So go check that out and check that, see that.
Ray, it's been awesome. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. I love talking. I do it for a living, but anytime I'm going to talk about trains, that's even better.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Around the Layout. Learn more about today's show on our Facebook page, facebook.com/Around the Layout. Show your support by becoming an operating crew member at patreon.com/Around the Layout podcast. Past episodes and more can be found on our website, aroundthelayout.com. And send us your feedback, aroundthelayout@gmail.com. Thanks for hanging out with us around the layout.